We're learning the second Sikhe on Parshas Acharei in Chelek Chav Beis on page 96. The shir today is being learned L'Le Nishmas Rav Yosef ben Yamin ben Rav Menashe Koltman. Beim Siyum von the Sedre in the end of this week's Parsha is the Torah Messiahim Parshas Arayis mit Nonzog. The Torah concludes the Parsha where it discusses Arayis, the forbidden relations, with the following command. Ushmartem es mishmarti, you should keep mishmarti, what you're supposed to keep in these mitzvahs. Levilti asais mechukes atayevis goyme, not to follow any of these behaviors which are abominable. V'loisitamu bem, do not become impure with them. Ani Hashem alekechem, I am Hashem your God. Stellt sich Rashi of the Werte, v'loisitamu behem, ani Hashem alekechem. So in the last words here of the Parsha, Rashi quotes these words and says, and is mefarish and explains as follows. Ha'im tetamu, from this we understand, if you will become impure, Eini elikechem, I am not your God. Ve'atem nifsalim mi'acharei, and you are cut off from following after me. Uma hana yeshli bechem, and what benefit do I have with you? Or what pleasure do I have with you? Ve'atem ischayv kloya, and you then will deserve annihilation. L'kach nemar, this is why the pasuk here concludes and says, Ani Hashem elikechem, I am Hashem your God. This is Rashi. Now, what's Rashi here coming to explain? The Tam, Favos Rashi is nit mefarish di Werter, Ani Hashem lekechem. Now, first of all, the reason why Rashi does not explain these three words of Ani Hashem lekechem, v'yer is mefarish beparshas ve'era. The way Rashi explains it, the first time when the Torah says this expression in Parshas Ve'era, Ani Hashem, says Rashi, Neman liparacholo, that Hashem can be trusted to punish when punishment is deserved. Or Ani Hashem means Neman litn schar. Hashem can be relied upon, he's trusted to give reward when the reward is deserved. So why doesn't Rashi here say a similar pshat regarding Ani Hashem lekechem? Or befrat, as sagt dort, especially that Rashi there says, as azoi is Ani Hashem nidrash bekame mekaymis. This is the way, we explain the term of Ani Hashem or Ani Hashem lekechem in many places. So the reason why Rashi does not say this is v'mefarshim zen and masber, as mefarshim explained this as follows. The inyan Ani Hashem nemol l'shalim schar. The meaning over here, the idea that Hashem says I give reward for my mitzvahs that are done, only para, and also the fact that Hashem punishes, is schon gestanden früher in the parsha. It already said this earlier in the beginning of the parsha. So therefore there's no place to say that the Torah is repeating the same point again. Therefore we must say, as Ani Hashem lekechem meint an inyan chadash. When the Torah here is repeating and saying again at the end of the parsha, Ani Hashem lekechem, it's introducing a new point with this statement. However, we still need to understand what Rashi explains here. Von die Werte, v'lo yisitamu behem, Ani Hashem lekechem, when the Torah here says, do not become impure, I am your God, so seemingly the only thing that you could understand and explain here is, miklalhein at the shemei alav, the Torah says the positive, and from this you could deduce and understand the negative, that ha'im tetamu, that if you will become impure, Eini elikechem, I am not your God. So that's the beginning of what Rashi says, explaining what's the new point in these words. From vanet nemt Rashi the alle pratim v'says danach. However, from where does Rashi take all the additional details that Rashi says afterwards? That va'atem nifsalim acharei, you are cut off from following me. Uma na yeshli bechem, what benefit do I derive from you? And va'atem ischayv kloya, and that you deserve annihilation. Where does Rashi see this hinted in the meaning of these words in the pasuk here? Yes, it's true that Pirish steht in Teres Kainim. Rashi is repeating the pshat that it says in Teres Kainim. Aber, however, vigeret kam upon already explained many times, is nit in Yoni von Rashi bepirushi al Teire zu meitig sein droshes Chazal ubelishainan. Rashi's purpose and his Pirish on Teire is not just to quote the Pirish that it says in Chazal and to use verbatim, word for what it says. Rashi brings what's necessary for the pshat and the pasuk. Befrat, as Rashi sagt nit, ise beteires kainim v'chayetze b'ze. Rashi does not point out that he's just quoting what it says in Teires Kainim. Was the fun is mochach, so therefore it's clear as Rashi nemt on dem Pirish als pshutish al mikra. that Rashi is quoting this because in Rashi's opinion, this is the simple meaning of the pasuk. The says, as die Werte, v'lo yisitama behem. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, these words do not become impure. I am your God, brengt erois die alle drei pratim. It expresses the three details that Rashi says here, atem nefsalim Acharei, that you cut off from following me, ma'ano yesh li bechem, what benefit do I derive in you, v'atem mischayvim kloya, and that you'll be deserving for annihilation. Is tamua, so it's difficult to understand. From vanet is the hechrich and pshute shamikra of the pratim. Where is the proof, or what's forcing us to say, in the simple pshat of the pasuk, the details that Rashi says here? Can it fit in? You can't answer and say, as Rashi muz, oder akoponem vil, mefaret zayin, fahren benchomish, lemikra, dem badeit von eni elekechem im allgemein. That maybe we could say that Rashi here is just elaborating and explaining what does it really mean when we say that Hashem says, I am not your God? What does that consist of? What's the result of that? And therefore Rashi spells out these details of what Eini Elokeichem consists of, but there is no actual raya in the language of the pasuk here to all the details that Rashi says. Rather, this is the general explanation of Eini Elokeichem. So that can't be true. Weil dem Teichen von Eini Elokeichem gefit mich schon früher in Pirish Rashi. This content that Hashem says, I will not be your God, is already found earlier in Rashi himself. I think pasuk in Parshas Lech, v'nesati l'cha goyim eretz kanan goyim v'yisi lehem lelekim, is Rashi mifarish. So there Rashi explains when it says that Hashem says, I will give you this land and then I will be your God. So Rashi says, Aval ador b'chutz la'aretz kimi she'en lo yalekah. One that lives outside Eretz Yisrael is considered to be like one that has no God. When Rashi is the by nit meisiv kein bir, Rashi doesn't add any explanation what this means when Hashem says, I am not your God. Definitely, Rashi doesn't add any additional details about this. So why here is it necessary for Rashi to say these details? It must be because there's a certain hechrech in the language of the pasuk here that brings him to these to say these details. Move on. Another question there is the Yisaf V'siyim from Rashi. Rashi adds and concludes, L'kach nemar ani Hashem Elokeichem. This is why the pasuk is saying these words, ani Hashem Elokeichem. Was is da Rashi Meisif? What's Rashi adding by saying this? It looks like Rashi is coming to answer a question. This is why it says. What question is he answering to explain that this is why it says? Furthermore, when you look at the beginning of Rashi, Rashi quotes all these words from the pasuk. Is mashma, so from this it seems as the Schwierigkeit in pasuk is euchen die Wörter v'lo yisatame behem. So it seems that the difficulty here in the pasuk is also with the words of v'lo yisatame behem. Ubesiyom is Rashi maitik blois die Wörter ani Hashem Elokeichem. But then in the end, when Rashi after he explains the details, and then he comes back and says that this is the meaning just of these three words of ani Hashem Elokeichem. Unit v'lo yisatame behem. And Rashi does not quote the words of Eloi Sefamabem that he does in the beginning of his Pirish. Okay, so now in order to explain this Rashi here, which is at the end of Parshas Arayis, where the Torah concludes with these words, Eloi Sefamabem ani Hashem Elokeichem, the Rebbe will bring us back to the beginning of the Parsha, what it says there as an introduction to the entire Parsha, and based on what it says there, we'll understand how Rashi explains the end, the conclusion, the closing of this Parsha. So we'll understand this. Let's first explain what Rashi says in the beginning of this parsha, of these forbidden relations. At the end of the pasuk, in the beginning of the parsha there, it says these words are also Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Rashi is mefarish, and there Rashi explains in the second shot that he says in those words, that Rabbi said about these words, Golui v'yidu alefonov, it's open and known to Hashem. Sheseifon lenatek ba'arayis. That in the end, Yidden are going to cut off from Hashem with this aveda of arayis, of forbidden relations. Lefichach ba'aleim b'gzeira. Therefore Hashem comes with very strong words as a decree, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am your God. What's the message with these words? Says Rashi, Du'u mi geizer aleichem. You should know who is it that is decreeing this upon you. Dayan lihipara, he's a judge that will punish if you don't listen, and also v'nemon, he can be relied upon, l'shalim schar, to reward you if you follow. That's the introduction and the meaning of Ani Hashem Elokeichem in the beginning of the parsha. Is l'chayden to move on. So here as well, all these different details that Rashi says about Ani Hashem Elokeichem also needs a clarification. Du'u mi geizer aleichem. When Rashi says that it's saying, know who is decreeing upon you. Undayan lehipara. And then when Rashi says that Hashem is the judge to punish, and v'nemol l'shalim schari can be relied upon to give reward. These are two completely separate interpretations of what Ani Hashem Elokeichem is saying. As clear from the fact was bekama erte that in other places where Rashi is mefarish, Ani Hashem, where Rashi explains that Ani Hashem means nemol l'shalem schar, that Hashem gives reward, or the nemol le'ipara, or that He punishes, v'chayetzu b'zeh. Zok der nit di akdame du'umi geizer aleichem. Usually in other places, Rashi does not give the introduction that know who is decreeing upon you. On and the same could be said in the reverse. Bekame bekaimis is Rashi mefarish, and there are other places where Rashi explains that what does Ani Hashem mean? Gezarti aleichem ietem rashoim lipater. I decree this upon you, and you can't exempt yourself from this. Or da mi gazar ala davar. You should know who is decreeing on this matter. Va'al yeka be'einecha. It should not be light in your eyes. And Rashi does not add and say that Hashem is trusted or relied upon to give reward. So it's clear we see that usually these are two different pirushim, two different meanings of Ani Hashem. If so, the question is, from Vanet Nemt Rashi, from where does Rashi take here to say, as Ani Hashem Elokeichem benidin didon, when it says here these words, meint beide inyanim. It includes both. Du'umi geizer aleichem, know who is the one that decrees, on dayin le'para v'nemol l'shalim schar, and that Hashem will punish or give reward. Is the bir b'zeh. So the explanation for why Rashi combines these two things together is as follows. By Parshas Harayis gefindt men adova miyuchad. In this parsha of these forbidden relations, we find something which is unique. As Eide, the Torah hyped on to Mefarish and the Protei HaIsurim, before the Torah begins and says the details of what is forbidden, steht the Hakdame Klolis on welche besteht von Kama v'Kama Inyanim. The Torah gives a general introduction, and this introduction includes a few details in it. And the Torah says as follows: Kamai said, "It's Mitzrayim goyim Eretz Canaan goyim Sasu." Don't follow the actions, the deeds of the people in Mitzrayim or in Eretz Canaan. Es mishpotai tasu. Follow my mitzvahs v'shamartem es chokaisai goyim, and you'll keep my laws. On the psiche von der Akdame Klolis, and then the opening pasuk of this entire general introduction is, it begins with Vayidab Hashem goyim, Dabab Bnei Yisrael goyim, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. I am Hashem your God. That's the opening of this introduction to this parsha. Now the time for was Torah git azah hagdome klolis va'arucha umerube zu Parshas Harayis. The fact that the Torah gives such a long and detailed introduction to this parsha of Harayis is move on b'pashtus. It's simply understood. Harayis zenen dochazach was nafshe shel adam misav lehem. These forbidden relations is something that there's a strong desire that a person has in this. And to the point, as noch di Allah's haris, and that even after all these warnings, is Rashi bringt it up, kanal seifon lenatek ba'arayis. That in the end, Yidden disconnected because of these averis of arayis. The Rebbe fordern sich divrei zirus und mereras haris. So therefore, it's necessary here to have special encouragement and warnings zu bavaran as man soll sein abgehitten dem beistehend dem Nisayin. To be careful, to protect yourself, or to guard yourself from this, to withstand the big test of this Isser of Arayis, where there's a very strong taiva that the nefesh of a person has. That's the reason for the lengthy introduction and encouragement. So now based on this, the three words of Ani Hashem Elokeichem state in the psiche von der Akdame Klolis. This is the opening statement of this general introduction regarding this whole parsha, is the Rebbe Mistaver. So it's logical to say, as das is an inyan v'zirus klali, that in these three words of Ani Hashem Elokeichem, this includes in it the general encouragement for everything that comes here later in the parsha. Das is the tam, so this is the reason, was the erste pirish from Rashi, of Ani Hashem Elokeichem in the psiche, the first pshat that Rashi says in these three words of Ani Hashem Elokeichem. So Rashi says as follows, is Kibaltem Aleichem Malchusi, You accepted upon yourself my kingdom. So now accept upon yourself my decrees as well. Which is an inyan hachi klali. This is the most general point here for Yidden. Kabbalah sel mitzvahs gzeres, to accept upon themselves the yoke of the mitzvahs, of the gzeres, of the decrees that's coming here in this parsha. That's the first point Rashi says. And then in order to explain the Eichleuten zweiten Pirish, that according to the second Pirish that Rashi says, as Ani Hashem Elokeichem, is azhare nit nur of Kabbalah's gzeres bechlal. It's not just a warning to accept Hashem's decrees in general, nor be'ikir of inyan ha'arayis, rather primarily here to accept these forbidden things, these forbidden relations, is Ani Hashem Elokeichem and inyan klali, that Ani Hashem Elokeichem is the general point, was the far is das bepsichas ha-parsha, and therefore it comes here at the opening of this parsha, is Rashi mefarish. So Rashi goes on and explains as their lashon, Ani Hashem Elokeichem v'shtei da, that this expression of Ani Hashem Elokeichem that says here in this context is kailol kama pratim. It includes in it a few details. It's not just the general idea of Ani Hashem Elokeichem that means that Hashem rewards or Hashem punishes, and so on, like it says in other places. But here, in the context of this opening of the general akdama and encouragement for this entire parsha that's unique, we see that the Torah writes these words as Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Rashi says it contains in it more details of a message of what Yidden should think about when they come to this parsha. And therefore, Yed Vort is meramis of abazundere ashara. Each one of the three words of Ani Hashem Elokeichem hint to a different point in what Hashem is warning. Ani, the word Ani says, Du mi geizer aleichem. Know who I am. Know who it is that is commanding or decreeing upon you. Hashem, nemol l'shalem schar. Hashem is the Eibishter that is kindness and therefore gives reward. And Elokeichem is Hashem that will punish when punishment is deserved. Those are the three details that Rashi mentions here. Was di drei in yonim. These three details, zenen kailol ala oifanim klolium. This includes all the three general ways or approaches. Durch welchem en ken bavirken mention beherrschen die taivis wegen welches retzich in der parsha. How you can influence or convince a person to control these desires and lusts that a person has regarding the subject that's discussed here in this parsha. Even if they are very strong lusts and desires. So these are the 3 points that Rashi is saying here in the opening and the beginning of this parsha that the Torah is mentioning to encourage a Yid how to control himself and discipline himself. So here the Rebbe elaborates more and explains what exactly is here in these three details of the Umi Geizer Aleichem, Nemon L'Shalem Schar, and Dayan Lihipara. Velendik ophalten a Yidden von a Taive Gedele B'Yoser. When you want to hold back a Yid from giving into a very strong desire. The first point that you have to tell him is, know who it is that is decreeing upon you about this. And you must know and remember, as das is Acharei from the Meibischen, the Beire Ha'ilam Uman Higai. It's a decree from Hashem, the creator of the world, and the one that conducts all matters in this world. And the Rebbe, so therefore, is meglech, as durch nachgeben die Taive, heipich ratzen abeide. It's impossible that if you think that you desire something that seems to be something that will be so good and beneficial for you, it's impossible that something which is the opposite of the will of the creator of this world, Zolam Zayin Gut, should be something that will be good and beneficial for you. That's the first point. That if you understand and know who it is that's decreeing this, it's not just a force, a power that's decreeing this upon you that is saying, do so and so, even though it will not be good for you. No. If you know that the Eibishter is the one that creates the world and every moment makes everything happen, this is the real and ultimate good. Anything that's not according to his will, it's impossible that there should be a good experience in this. That's the first point. But then one may try to convince himself, that I don't care about the matter of Achrisa Mara Kalana. To use the expression of the pasuk that Chazal say, that in the end, giving into this desire, it'll be bitter to me like a bitter herb. As long as for the time being, right now I'm enjoying myself, let me just give into this and enjoy myself for the time being, and you won't pay attention to what this may cause in the future. Darauf kommt die zweite Warnung. For this comes the second point of Elekechem, that's Dayan Li'Para, that Hashem is a judge which pays or punishes. But Rashi here, when he talks about punishment, uses specifically this expression of Lihipara. What does this mean? What's the meaning of the word Lihipara? When one does not listen to the will of Hashem, it's not only that there's a consequence, there's a punishment. This is given to the person like something which is being paid back. What does it mean, being paid back? Hashem punishes in a manner where it's like paying back. He returns, which means what happens is Hashem causes that the entire pleasure that you had previously from this sin itself is all returned. That experience is completely wiped away. That he's left with nothing. It's all removed and taken away from him, that he's left with nothing other than just pain and suffering. So that's another way, the second approach to explain a person how the taiva that's so burning and desired that a person wants to come and fulfill, but nevertheless you should realize what he's going to be left with at the end. But then after this, the question becomes, why did Hashem create a person with this nature? Why does Hashem create a person with such a strong desire, which it seems to him that he can't overcome? So therefore the pasuk here says the third point, that Hashem can be relied upon to give reward. The Rebbe will give Yidden schar. Hashem wants to reward Yidden. Und the Far stellt man him Far Anisayin. So therefore, Hashem creates a challenge, a test. And the Far schar. And the point there is that he will overcome this test, and then he'll deserve the reward that Hashem gives. Und was schweres is the Avodah zu beistehen den Nisayin, the more difficult the work to overcome this challenge is, als mehr schar v'tebakumen, more reward the person will receive. So those are the three details that the pasuk here says, Ani Hashem Elekechem, as a general introduction to this parsha, discussing a very difficult isser of arayis that a person struggles with to overcome. That's in the beginning of the parsha, as an opening, as an introduction, as an encouragement for all these isurim. Now, b'shas, we come to the siyum hasedre. So then, based on this, now when you come at the conclusion, at the closing of this parsha, zetmen as the Torah chazet kama azharas of arayis. We see that the Torah, after it says all the details, it repeats again warnings about these isurim of arayis. It says al titamu b'chol leila, don't become impure with all this. Shmartem oisam atem, that is es chukais hagomer, keep all of my laws. And then the pasuk says, "As durch oive sein of arayis kommt verschiedene Einschen." It says there in the pasuk regarding this that if one does not keep the isurim of arayis, there are various different punishments. That the land should not spit you out. Your soul will be cut off. And then comes the pasuk, the last pasuk in the parasha that we're dealing with here. Kommt der letzte pasuk, ushmartem es mishmarti levilti asayis mechukes atayeves geimer. So the Torah again repeats that you should listen and you should not impurify yourself. I am your God. Why is this repetition here again at the end of the parsha? If not for the last three words of Ani Hashem Lekechem, then we would explain and say, as das was the Torah chazet dibe as haris v'chulu ushmartem es mishmarti goim v'loise tamo behem. The fact that the Torah repeats this again is al derech wie Rashi hat mefarish given frier beim Isser von Achilles Shratzim v'chulu. So you can explain this similar to what Rashi himself already explained earlier by when he speaks about the Isser of eating from the creeping and crawling things that are non-kosher. As das is laver aleim balaven harbe. The Torah is repeating this so that when one does not listen, when he eats from this, he's over on more than one lav. It's one lav here regarding these shratzim that you're over, and the Torah repeats it that it's more than one lav regarding this. That's what we would say here as well regarding the Isser of Arayis. But since over here the Torah repeats the Isser and then it adds and repeats the words Ani Hashem Elekechem, Was in them is Nitscheiche Sagen Harbe. Regarding Ani Hashem Lekechem, the repetition here, you can't say that the Torah is repeating this again because it's more than one. That can't be said about Ani Hashem Lekechem. So why is the Torah repeating again Ani Hashem Lekechem? Is das machriach zu sagen? So it's this that forces us to say, as the ganze Hemshech Asiyum, that the whole conclusion here of this pasuk is nit lava chulu harbe. It's not so that you will transgress many times because it says another Isser again. Rather, the Torah here is closing with the words Ani Hashem Lekechem, similar to the opening in the introduction to this whole parsha. Just like this parsha begins with an introduction and a general encouragement, Ani Hashem Lekechem, Kamai Seretz Mitzrayim Goyme, Es Mishpotei Tasa Goyme, Shomartem Es Chokaisa Goyme, as explained. Al derech zeh is the siyum parsha mit an endliche zirus klali. Similar, it closes with a general encouragement, Shmartem Goymer and Ani Hashem Lekechem. Was besteht aber der Auftu und Yisroim von dem Zirus besiyum parsha legabe dem Zirus shebetchilasa? What is added and what more is there here? And what the Torah is encouraging at the end of the parsha, more than what it already said, the same words of Ani Hashem Lekechem in the beginning of the parsha. Of them sagt Rashi, this is what Rashi is explaining here and says, V'loi sitamu behem ani Hashem Lekechem. What does this mean? The Torah here is adding that ha into tamu, if you will become impure, any Lekechem, I will not be your God. The chiddush da besteht in the shlila. What's new here and what the Torah is adding is the negative, that im tetamu, if you will be impure, any Lekechem, you'll become cut off from Hashem. That's what's being said here. The chiddush beim siyum legabe dem friedigem zirus. What's novel here in the conclusion regarding what it already said earlier, und der Fahr kommt es lebesoif besiyum parsha, and therefore it comes at the end to add a new point. That Ani Hashem Lekechem shebetchilas parsha, when it says the three words of Ani Hashem Lekechem in the beginning of this parsha, is in yonim fun chiyuv. Here it's addressing encouragement for Yidden in the positive sense. The Rebbe is geyser of Yidden gzeiris, to know who Hashem is, that He's the one that decrees. Und in Beide Kavin, and that Hashem's involvement in encouraging Yidden to fulfill these mitzvahs is in both Dayan Lihipara, whether He's there and Hashem is disciplining with a consequence, or V'nemel L'Shalom Schar, Hashem also is relied upon to reward. This is all Hashem's actions in the positive sense of His involvement in ensuring and encouraging Yidden to fulfill these Isurim Varayas. That's in the beginning of the Parsha. When it says Da Einer. However, when there's an individual, all these three details as spelled out earlier, they have no effect on him. This will not persuade him to separate from these taivas. He knows who it is that commands. Hashem that runs the world, and the only goodness could be when you follow His will. And he also knows, as explained before, the point that Hashem punishes, and He punishes like a peroin, where He takes back any pleasure that you may think you would have. And also that you will lose any reward if you don't stand up to the challenge that will only give you greater reward. But nevertheless, the desire is still so powerful that he can't withstand this test. So here comes the addition in the end of the parsha, is Torah Meisef B'siyam parsha Noch Hanoifin V'tzepoyelin Oichefin. So here the Torah adds another way how this individual can influence and persuade himself to hold himself back from this Aveda. Durich Meidiyah Zayin, by letting him know, as im titamu, if you become impure, Eini Elekechem, I will not be your God. Das rührt an, der Verbund von Yidden mit dem Eibishten. That the Isser of Arayis, forbidden relations, is not just a matter ben Adam Lachaveda, is something that is an Aveda in that sense, but it's something that actually touches and affects your relationship with Hashem. And as we can clearly see, as when a Yid heard, as Acharei, when a Yid hears such words, that Eini Elekechem, that Hashem says to him, I am not your God, this completely shakes him up, and this is something that he can't handle. The bewusste Wort, as the well-known Wort, that's brought in Yom Yom, Ayid, nit will, und nit kann sein, abgerissen von Göttlichkeit. That when it comes to any Jew, he cannot handle to be separated, not he wants, not he can be separated or cut off from godliness. So this is the addition in the end of the parsha when the Torah says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, that one that cannot convince himself to put aside or to let go of this taiva, of this desire for Isser of Arayis, the Torah over here says the way to speak to such a person is to shake him up and to let him know, Ani Elokeichem, you're cutting yourself off from Hashem, from your source of who you are. And that will definitely completely shake him up to separate from these Avedas. That's the general kavanah here in the conclusion, in the end of the parsha. Now here the Rebbe comes back based on what we said, that what it says here at the end, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, is related to the Ani Hashem Elokeichem in the opening of the parsha. We'll now understand the details that Rashi adds when he explains this point of Ani Elokeichem. Based on this, we'll also understand Rashi is mefaret and gitzu di drei pratim. Why Rashi elaborates and says the three details that vatem nefsalim me'acharei, you will be cut off from following me. Uma no yesh li bechem, what benefit do I derive from you? And vatem ischayim kloya, and you will deserve to be annihilated. What are these three details here? Vibal der teichen as hare vizirus von Ani Hashem Elokeichem shebesiyam asedre is bedug mit zum Minyan von Ani Hashem Elokeichem shebetchilas parshas Arayis. These three words of Ani Hashem Elokeichem at the conclusion of this parsha is corresponding and similar to the Ani Hashem Elokeichem in the beginning of the parsha. On the Chelek is not, the difference though is, was frier is a senachiyuv. In the beginning, it's speaking about this in the positive sense, the details of Hashem's involvement regarding this Aveda, on some sof, and then in the end of the parsha, in shlila, in the negative, and how you can get cut off. Is move on, so therefore it's understood as geshem v'ani Hashem Elokeichem shebetchilas haparsha is kailul drei pratim. Just like Rashi explained in the beginning of the parsha, that Ani Hashem Elokeichem includes three details. Jede Wort abazunde prat kanal barucha. Each word, Ani, Hashem, Elokeichem, is another detail in the introduction for this parsha. Is al derech zeh oich by Ani Hashem Elokeichem shebesiyam asedre. So therefore Rashi here concludes and says similar in the end of the parsha as is an kailul dizelbe drei pratim, that the three words of Ani, Hashem, Elokeichem includes the same three details, not in the meifun von shlila, but in the negative sense, in how a person gets cut off from Hashem in these three details here. So what are the three details? That Ani b'tchilas haparsha meant, as Rashi says, the Ani, who am I, Hashem says, in the beginning of the parsha, is the U mi geizer aleichem. Know who it is that decrees upon you. Was das weiß Kanal, what this refers to is, wie der Eibishter vernimmt sich mit Yidden als sein Volk, welcher sagt dann Gzeres. This is Hashem himself saying, look, I'm here, I'm involving myself and decreeing upon you these Gzeres. That's the Ani in the beginning of the parsha. Now, b'makbil is that, in contrast to this, or corresponding to this, kommt besof ha-parsha, the tzad ha-shlili from selben inyan. You have over here the negative of the exact same point, that atem nifsalim me'acharei, that you will become cut off from following me. V'yeshloimar oich miloshem psalacha, the word nifsalim is similar to the word psalacha, carve out for yourself, which means oishakin, to carve out and uptailen, and to separate. So in the beginning of the parsha, it talks about Hashem involving himself, and therefore there's a connection by the very fact that Hashem commands Yidden regarding these Avedas. And in the end of the parsha, it says, if you don't keep, you get cut off from that connection that there is between you and Hashem. B'makbil to the minyan von Hashem. And then, in contrast to what it says in the beginning of the parsha, where the term Hashem means nemon l'shalem schar, that Hashem could be relied upon to give you reward, with chilas ha-parsha, that it said in the beginning. Was the tashlum schar weist, what is the idea of Hashem rewarding? What this indicates is, as by the Meibishten is nachas ruach lefanai, that we cause pleasure to Hashem. Ratano from Avedis Bnei Yisrael. Hashem derives pleasure from these Yidden serving Him. Komterinyan fon, so here in the end of the parsha, in the negative, when one gets cut off from Hashem, here the pasuk says, Uma hano yashli b'chem. Shlilusa hano. What pleasure do I have in you? The fact that Hashem says there's no pleasure in Yidden when they do not keep these mitzvahs here. And then the third point, b'makbil zum inyan Elokeichem, which is dayan lihipara b'tchilas haparsha, in contrast to Elokeichem, which means that Hashem will punish, and that it says in the beginning of the parsha, was wie bald der Rebischte vernimmt sich mit der Yidden im zu meinisch sein. What it's really saying in the beginning of the parsha, when Hashem punishes, is that Hashem pays attention and he focuses on disciplining Yidden. What this really actually expresses is the relationship and the closeness and the love that Hashem has for Yidden. That's why he's disciplining. That's why there's a punishment, a consequence when the Avedas happen. Especially according to what's known as the Einshim Shebetayre Zen L'Tayvus Adam. All punishments in the Torah are all for the benefit of the person. It's not something which is got negative intrinsically, where Hashem is trying to just hurt you, God forbid. On the contrary, it's love, where Hashem is trying to discipline you and guide you. That's the way it says it in the beginning of the parsha regarding the punishment. At the conclusion of the parsha, the Torah warns and says, "Atem mischayvim kloya," that you will be deserving annihilation, which means mefalirt the shaychus mit neibischen. We lose this connection to Hashem. Was hu chayecha, He is your life. Ubemele an inyan from kloya rachman litzlan, and as a result, there's an annihilation. God forbid. This is the opposite of Hashem focusing on disciplining and expressing His closeness to Yidden in that sense. With this we understand also why Rashi then concludes at the end, Lekach nemar ani Hashem Elokeichem. This is why it says these words, ani Hashem Elokeichem. What's Rashi adding by this? The mitvel Rashi klar machin. With this Rashi wants to make it clear, as das was sagt die drei pratim, the reason that he's saying here, these three details, is was eine verbunden kanal b'derech shlile mit die drei l'shaynis and pasik ani Hashem Elokeichem. Rashi wants to make it clear that the three details he's saying is not just three details elaborating upon the idea of being cut off from Hashem, but it's actually three details that are hinted in the three words of Ani and Hashem and Elokeichem. That's the pshat in Rashi here. As we see here, the end of the parsha, the conclusion is me'en, similar to the psiche, to the opening where the Torah gives the encouragement for a yid to be careful with these avedas of arayis, which is a very, very unique and strong taiva in a person, and therefore the Torah is giving unique encouragement, both in the positive and in the negative sense, for a person to take the kayach to be able to overcome these taivas, these desires. According to Chassidus, we could explain the shaykhs from the drei pratim and to the drei l'shaynis ani Hashem Elokeichem. We could explain the connection of the three details that Rashi says, how they're connected to the three expressions in the pasuk of ani Hashem Elokeichem. Ba'ofen achem me'anal. This is in a different way than what was explained according to the pshat of Rashi. So what are the three expressions in the pasuk? Ani, I, Hashem Himself, is atzmusai u'mohusai isbarach. This refers to the essence of Hashem Himself. Is hechef and is havas eilemis, completely removed and higher from a creation and existence of a world. Kamaimere Yedua, as the famous statement that Alter Rebbe says, Loi zehu ikir ha'alekos mashal eilemis mishavim mimenu. This is not the way we define godliness by the fact that He's a creator of the universe. That's a level where Hashem comes down from who He is Himself. In His true reality of Hashem, there's no room for anything other than Him. The fact that Hashem creates is Hashem coming down from who He truly is. That's the level of Ani. Aval Pikein. But then, Vet Oich Ani Nimshach in Welt. The essence of Hashem is present and comes into the existence of the world that Hashem creates. And this is accomplished through the Aveda when a Yid serves Hashem by learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. As it says in the Medrash, the desire of Hashem was that He should have a dwelling here in these lower worlds. And what does the word dira mean? As durach Torah mitzvahs. When a Yid learns Torah and does mitzvahs, machen Yidden die Welt for a dira, you create in this world a dwelling, and dwelling means latzmusai u'mohusai isbarach, for the very essence of Hashem. How do you see this in the word dira? Punkt vi in dira sadam. Just as it is with a person in his private home. The atzmus ha'adam darba dira. When a person is in his private place, he's not dressing up or presenting himself a certain aspect of who he is, like when he walks out in the street, when he is mingling with others, when he's in the privacy of his home, there he is to himself as he is, the essence of the person. That's the expression of dira, where Hashem, the essence of Hashem, is brought into the world through Torah mitzvahs. That's the ani in the pasuk here. Havaya, the second word of Havaya is Meloshin Mahava. Is Hashem coming down now to create a world. Creation in the general sense of all worlds. Then, when the pasuk says your God, and when elekechem, the word elekah means the energy, the power, and it says elekechem, that Hashem is your power. Biz koyach hapayel benifal. This is the power of Hashem that's invested within the created being, specifically each individual level. The madrege von elekos was sich mislavish and nivra. This refers to the level of godliness which is invested and present, specifically tailored according to the level of the individual creation that there is in the existence of the world. Those are the three levels that the pasuk is talking about in the three words of Ani Hashem Elekechem. Nachdem sagt Rashi, and after this Rashi then says, Ha'im tetamu, if you will be impure, Eini Elekechem, I am not your God. Und das liegt sich in alle drei inyanim. And this is expressed in the three details that the pasuk here says. Der erste inyan, the first point, behemshich zu Eini Elekechem, in the continuation or in relation to what the pasuk says, Elekechem meaning I am your energy. This is the level of life that you have invested in your being, of what you simply the life of a person on his specific level that Hashem provides for him. That's the term of Elekechem. So in connection to this is vas atem nifsalim me'acharei. Rashi uses the expression that you will be cut off from following behind me. Acharei, the expression Rashi uses, behind me, bechinas achareim, the level that is the back, the behind of Hashem, what does this hint to? Is Shem Elokim. This refers to the name of Elokim, which is not the essence of Hashem, or not even a level of godliness where Hashem creates the worlds in general, but a much lower level where Hashem is coming down to exist and be in the world based on the level of its existence, according to the limitations of the existence of the world. That's Acharei. That's a very low level of godliness. On Yidden werden nifsal abgeschnitten, when Yidden do Averis, and these here, we're talking about the Arayas, so then they cut off from them koyach hapayel benifal, from that power of Hashem that's invested and is felt within them. Shem Elokim, the level of Shem Elokim, that life that they have from Shem Elokim is cut off. Then another point Rashi says, Uma no yeshli b'chem. What benefit do I derive from you? What is this referring to? The Aveidiv in Yidden is Gaidim Tainig Lamaila. When Yidden serve Hashem, this causes pleasure by Hashem. As Hashem says, Nisava, this was Hashem's desire. Nisava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyas Leis Baruch Dire B'Tachtainim. The term Nisava is the pleasure of Hashem. This is the Tainug HaAtzmos Ani von Aveidas Torah Mitzvahs. This is the pleasure of Hashem Himself and the fulfillment of Torah Mitzvahs of Yidden. Is im tetamu, in connection to this, Rashi says, if you'll be impure, then mahano yashli b'chem. This hana, the essence of Hashem that comes through Torah mitzvahs, will not be there. And the third point that Rashi says, v'atem mischayvim kloya, you'll deserve annihilation, which means nit not, as this is the shlila from koyach hapayel benifal. Not only will you not have the connection to the energy of your personal life that's invested in you, nor as vet the shlila mitzad havaya. This will also negate the general power of creation that Hashem provides, which is klolis in Yinas Havos, and therefore this brings about total annihilation on a general sense, besides the individual level of life that is invested in you that you're disconnecting from. Those are the three details here that you see in the words of Rashi, Ani, the essence of Hashem, the general source for creation, and the specific Elekechem, the specific life, the force and energy that you have in your life. But however now, noch dem is Rashi Abba Messiah. After all of this, Rashi though concludes and says, Lekach nema. This is why the pasuk here says, Ani Hashem Elekechem. I am Hashem your God. What is Rashi saying with this conclusion? The mechuvin from the Azharis. What is the purpose of all of these warnings? Is nit as a chas v'shalom zayna matziv as a matziv. It's not, God forbid, that there should be such a kind of situation where you didn't get cut off to this extent. Nor as the chiyuv, rather to bring out the positive, that Ani Hashem Elekechem, that I am your God. On the far and therefore afapi as the chiddush in der ashara da legabi as cholas haparsha is the shlila. Even though, as explained before, what's new in these words of Ani Hashem Elekechem in the end of the parsha here is the negative. The fact that ha'im tetamu eini Elekechem, that if you'll be impure, then Hashem says, I will not be a God. Steht aber im Pasuk, Ani Hashem Elekechem. But nevertheless, even over here, where the point of the Pasuk is the negative, in the Pasuk itself, it's written in the positive, that Ani Hashem Elekechem, I am your God. Well, the matara is, because the purpose is, As es soll sein, Ani Hashem Elekechem. that Hashem should be your God in all 3 points that the pasuk here says. Esol zayin di ano b'chem, that there should be the pleasure in the avodah v'yid, which corresponds to the ani. Ubemei levert ani Hashem Elokeichem. Then you have the ani, and then also Hashem Elokeichem, which means that's musay umuhusay yisbarach. The very essence of Hashem, vet nimshach in Yidden, comes down and is drawn down into the existence of a Yidden in a pnimius, in an eternal fashion, that a Yid could live with it on his level. Biz as der ani vet havaya Elokeichem koichachem v'chayisechem. It becomes your energy and your life from Yad and Yidden, from every individual Jew.